It's time for today's face-off on Fox Soul. Challengers Quan LX and Big Angry Adams, ready to go blow by blow on those hot topics. Face-off on Fox Soul starts right now.
So you had no previous contact with Pastor Bill?
Zero. I didn't want any previous contact. My only criteria was you're breaking the first commandment.
But Pastor Bill was innocent.
Innocent? In your perspective, there's nothing
But
worse,
not yours.
There's nothing worse than breaking the first commandment. I drove from there to Bill's house like 2 in the morning on a Sunday night, and I executed him. It's fast. I mean, it's, you know, I didn't want it to be bloody. I didn't want it to be a painful. I'm not trying to torture the guy. I just wanted to execute him quickly. Put him in the cross position on the wall, and I screwed him to the wall. And then I had a crown of thorns I put on his head. So he's crucified against the wall, you know, in the image of Jesus. Because what I'm saying is, you know, what you're preaching is not what God said. It's the opposite of what God said.
Most people that would come into that scene, Bill's murder scene, would be horrified.
In this round, here's Quan LX.
Charles, we just watched an interview of what I believe is a man who is a terrorist, who targeted a specific group of religious men who he felt had deviated from the true teachings of the Bible, and it was his divine duty and divine right in his sick mind to kill them as quick as he can. And he believed that he was being commanded by God to do this. And I wonder why he was not called a terrorist in this interview. I wonder why law enforcement didn't call this man a terrorist. I wonder why the media didn't label that this was a terrorist attack where a religious figure was murdered and killed for just being a Christian pastor or a Christian priest. I find it ironic we can easily quickly do it when some Muslim guy does it in this country. But he's just as wicked as any quote-unquote Islamic terrorist, because that so-called Christian terrorist right there is just as wicked, but he's not being called that.
I didn't know the angle you were going to take on this. I assumed in the production meeting you suggested that people that
I haven't finished yet.
Okay, go ahead.
Would you like me to keep going?
Yeah, please.
No, let me be honest with you. He wanted to crucify hypocrites who were in leadership in the Christian faith and religious faith that he's a part of, which is Christianity. Let me be honest with you. Those who are preaching the gospel of Jesus and in leadership positions, but you secretly want to groom kids to sexually rape them and be pedophiles in secret and protected by the church, you deserve crucifixion. Those same preachers who really don't believe in God, but have turned the gospel of Jesus into a financial hustle and using money as their desires in the name of God and have no respect for God, crucifixion shall touch you one day, and I hope sooner than later. So in that sense, I do believe that some of these fake leaders in religion should be crucified, but crucified in the proper sense, not by the hands of some singular individual, because they're Muslims who are doing the same thing, who are using God to shield criminal activity, criminal practices, but yet they try to hide behind the Holy Quran and the Prophet, peace be upon him. Hell no, all that needs to be crucified.
Okay, so here, firstly, in defense of Pastor Schoeneman, there is absolutely no evidence that he was a pedophile. I think that even the illusion is disgusting. There was no evidence that he was somehow a predatory pastor taking advantage of his flock, nor is there any suggestion that any of the other laundry list or the lengthy list of pastors that this monster, this murderer, who has been appropriately labeled a sociopath, a psychopath, a monster, a murderer, he's an evil person who is so evil that he put somebody on a wall and crucified him. And now you're talking about the appropriateness of crucifying people and slandering people. It's absurd. But let's go to the semantic parsing of terrorist, right? A terrorist is a part of an organization, right? We can name, any.
You don't have to be part of an organization.
Hold on. Yes, you do.
To
right?
be a terrorist,
so you have Hamas, right? You have all the ones that come to mind, right? That are all tied to the Islamic religion that find their justification in the book, right? And they use actual passages of the Quran.
Like what that man did. Talking about the first commandment.
Actually, he didn't. cite anything.
He's talking about the first commandment.
He referred to the first commandment.
They are not obeying the first commandment.
Okay.
They violated the first commandment. He did.
Right. He did point that out, but then he didn't go to another passage and say, this justifies
Well, how
me
many he got
killing.
to go to?
Well, anyone, especially in the New Testament, anyone that he could find that would justify, as you can find in the Quran, expressly
This was a sick individual.
You're right.
Who has a warped understanding of the religion.
To say,
the same way Timothy McVeigh did when he bombed that building in Oklahoma. The first
allegations of Muslim
the same
terror,
way the Ku Klux Klan do when they murder people and claim to be Christians.
Well, they were terrorists, right?
But
and
why
they
didn't
were
they
identified as terrorist
You don't think that was a
organization.
terrorist attack?
No, I think this was a crazy person, a murderer who was going to be a serial killer. That was
in the name of his religion.
Okay, no, in his disgusting perversion of his religion. And the difference, right? The difference between the Christian faith and pretty much every faith and Shia Muslims, and I mean there's a list of those in Islam who support that, is the widespread embrace of the idea that if you're an infidel, if you change religions from the Muslim faith to the Christian faith or the Muslim faith or the Jewish faith, if you as a woman get raped by a man, if you don't wear your jewelry, all of these reasons to blind, beat, and murder people. And you don't find that in other religions,
and you don't find
right?
in Christianity?
No, you don't. And that's just you constantly
you're
lying,
saying to me,
right? Because we should have honest conversations about the radicalism in the Muslim faith.
Has not been carried out against people in America?
Absolutely not.
By
I'm
those
not
who
saying,
claim to be
but
Christians?
I'm talking about now.
Because
I'm
those
talking
same
about the
evil
last 100
We just
years.
watched one.
One guy, a crazy guy that got arrested.
But wait a minute.
And will spend the rest of his life in prison.
We just had
where the Gazans, they had a party.
We just had another terrorist attack.
They had a party
a couple
for
of weeks
killing
ago,
people.
And he was a white supremacist religious bigot.
Okay.
Same thing, Charles.
Okay, who was
Charles,
that?
Who was that?
Let
me say this to you, Charles.
No, let's hear. Give me
Charles.
Who was that?
I want to make this point.
Oh,
real quick,
you don't want to say it. You just want to make stuff up. Go ahead.
Charles, let me tell you something.
Go ahead. Tell me how Christianity is the problem.
You have religious fanatics in every faith.
Yeah, but one has
and
a
you have
whole bunch of them.
And what we cannot
do. One has
a
huge number of them. And then another huge number of
to
people.
hijack the faith.
But you have.
And make that out to be the religion, Charles.
They run Iran.
But guess what, though?
They run Afghanistan.
Charles, let me say this.
They're taking over Europe.
Charles.
Right?
But what about what those European countries did in the name of Christianity in Africa?
Okay. So
they did all that in the name of Jesus.
You want to talk 500 years ago.
And they did the same thing right here. Up until 1995 in South Africa.
Okay.
Up until 1995
that wasn't under
in
the
South
Bible.
Africa.
That was just under control.
They held religious beliefs that believed that they had the edict to do it by permission of Scripture in South Africa.
This is
so,
another
Charles,
false equivalence.
You can't say that.
That was a government that was using
who had those same wicked beliefs.
It was not a government tied to a religion. It was a government that was oppressing a segment of the people because they believed.
You mean enslaving?
Okay, they were oppressing a segment.
Oppressing
of the people.
or enslaving?
They were during apartheid. It wasn't slavery.
Apartheid was,
it was
absolutely slavery.
Right? It was.
Apartheid was absolute slavery.
People were getting paid.
Oppression.
Right? You were trying.
Oppression is evil, but. What happened in apartheid in South Africa, that was nothing more than slavery.
What you're doing is minimizing the horrible reality
There's evil
of
in
slavery,
every religion for those who twist the faith.
Right,
you got sick-minded individuals who twist the religion and try to hijack it, and that's in every faith, Charles.
You want to talk about hijacking. What you did at the beginning of this segment.
Look at what Christian conservatives are doing right here in America.
At the beginning of this segment,
saying a woman who was raped by her father or raped, period, can't have an abortion.
Myself so I'm not interrupted. What you did at the beginning of this conversation was an effort to hijack it and move it away to, oh, poor, pitiful, oh, poor Islam being falsely accused of terrorism.
I didn't do that.
This isn't even a conversation about terrorism, right?
But that's a terrorist.
No, it's not a terrorist. It's a murderer criminal that's in jail, right? What happened to the Gazans that went over and killed all the people on October 7th? They didn't come back to be arrested by other Gazans. They came back to a celebration, right? And that's the problem. It's the radicalism in the Islamic faith that we shouldn't even be talking about now. We should be talking about this crazy guy, Adam Schiff, that literally nailed someone to a wall like as out of Silence of the Lambs, right? But like everything,
and he's not
you want
terrorist.
To take it and no, it's a murderer.
He wants to kill within a specific religion.
No.
He wants to attack a specific religion, and he wants to kill them because he has a twisted understanding of it. He's not carrying out terrorist acts.
But no, he's carrying out crimes, the crime of murder.
Well, all terrorist
right?
acts are criminal acts, Charles.
Terrorists are organized groups.
And that wasn't a hate crime.
No, that was
what he was doing wasn't a hate crime.
That was a murder. You don't have to.
And that's not a hate
more.
crime.
You don't have to have more. Like, I don't think the term hate crime is even relevant, right? I think it's whether it's a crime or not is what the concern should be, and it's the worst of crimes. It was murder in a horrific way of a completely innocent man that you have softly maligned and tried to steward to this conversation on Islam that you always want to have while you pretend the problems of Islam don't exist. And you know what? The pluralist Muslims have been exterminated.
Every religion has problems.
No religion has problems
Charles,
like radical Middle Eastern and South Asian and North African Islam.
We don't blame,
they would kill your religion.
We don't blame the whole Catholic Church for the behavior of many priests in the Catholic Church.
I blame the whole administration.
We don't blame
all
the
way
whole
up to
Catholic
the Pope.
Church, and we don't blame all Catholic people for the behavior of those sick men within the church who committed crimes against children and church officials who covered it up. We don't blame all Catholics for that.
You're right, and we just found all the dead babies in Ireland that were in a waste disposal unit, hundreds of them.
How the hell we talk about that story?
Well, but here's the thing. Yes. But that's the difference is the Catholic faithful are disgusted by the attacks on the children. The Catholic faithful are bothered by it.
And Muslims are too.
No, the problem is that probably 60% of Islamists
where you get these numbers from?
who are they're studies, right?
Who
actively believe it is okay to kill people that leave the faith, to actively think it's okay to kill people.
I've heard some Mormons do the same thing.
Okay, again, you have to
In fact, you have a group of Mormons who came right here to Houston in the early 2000s and murdered several families because they left the Mormon faith. Okay. They left the church, and that was the early 2000s right here in Houston. But we also had a Muslim father. But we had a Muslim father right there in Huntsville who killed a Rice University student because he believed she convinced his daughter to leave the faith. They're all criminals who are claiming religion,
with
Charles.
honor killing in the world?
What faith has a what?
A problem with honor killing.
When you say honor killing, what do you mean?
Well, how do you not know what honor killing is?
Oh, I know exactly what I mean, but I don't think you do.
No.
What do you mean by honor killings?
Killing
What's
your
honor
own
killing?
daughter for not following your faith. That's an honor killing.
That's not honor killing.
What faith has a problem with that?
That's not an honor killing.
Well, okay, let's call it whatever you want.
That's not honor
what
killing.
faith has a problem with that?
That's a sick father.
What faith has a problem with that?
That's a sick father. Islam has a problem with
Yeah, you're right. Not Christianity.
Islam condemns that.
Not Judaism.
Islam
not
condemns
Hindu.
that.
Well, the problem is, if
that.
you go to the Quran, imams go to the Quran and say, oh, no, this is okay right here.
No, that's not true.
It's exactly
true.
Not true.
They don't go to the Quran and justify that in the Quran.
There are so many Muslim people that are persecuted by other Muslims, right? And then there are the Muslims that whenever someone else wants to say, hey, this is a problem, they're shouted down as Islamophobic. I don't have any problem with Muslims of the Muslim faith.
Of migrants and Latino migrants in America are being terrorized by a man who talks about God love America, God bless America, and we thank Jesus Christ. But that same white boy will treat them brown Christian brothers and sisters because he's a racist white man. That's what he is. He'll treat them same brown Christians who are Latino like they're ungodly, they're not human. And I just watched a video today where some kids were in court, 5 and 6 years old, in zip ties, in court, immigration court, in zip ties. And that same racist, no good devil in D.C. will talk about God and talk about the Bible, but treat his fellow brothers and sisters who are Christians that same exact way. Don't tell me that, Charles.
I applaud your ability
to
move topics to completely unrelated
to give
topics.
You some facts.
It's masterful. But here's the thing. If you want to talk about Trump's immigration policies, I think it's way too heavy-handed. I think we have to have a pathway to citizenship. But as long as it's being equally applied to people from all over the world and of all races, and he's actually following the law, then it's the law.
You support him zip-tying kids in court?
The problem in America,
you support kids being zip-tied in court?
America is we haven't enforced immigration laws for so long, and we're using American tax dollars that should go to Black Americans and Latino Americans and white Americans Americans.
You
and
support
instead
kids
goes to
being
immigrants.
zip-tied in court?
No, I don't. But you have to remove illegal immigrants.
Look, girl was 4 years old with a zip tie on me.
Okay, and again,
in court.
What
man,
I don't know the details.
What any man would be down with that?
I absolutely
what
disagree
man
with it.
would stand there and watch that?
But to draw a false equivalence between that and somebody murdering people
that's
or
the
that
truth.
and Islamic
that
terror
man we
is
watched was a
absolutely
terrorist.
absurd.
That man was a terrorist.
What puzzled me was the last time I talked to the governor in the Capitol before session, he said, don't worry about the bill. He said, your bill is fine. That's what he told me, in front of witnesses. In fact, he asked a couple of lawyers on my staff, he said, can you give me some answers I can give, because when I sign this, I need some answers to give. So what happened? Who convinced him? On his staff, on the outside? To kill Senate Bill 3? You know, and look, we'll work with the governor. We'll see what happens in the special session. But where has he been all session?
In this round, here's Charles Big Angry Adams.
That was a clip of our lieutenant governor, which a lot of people outside the state of Texas don't realize. He is actually the most powerful politician in Texas, because Dan Patrick sets the agendas for Senate and determines what is allowed to go through and not, right? It's a very strong position that often people think of as just the vice president, which is, you know, obviously incredibly powerless on the federal level. Dan Patrick, this is him, for those that aren't from Texas, don't understand, this was him whining about our Governor Abbott vetoing his effort to put more restrictions on hemp, marijuana, and THC products. He had passed a bill, Senate Bill 3, that also passed in the Texas House, that would prohibit almost all the products, shut down a multi-billion-dollar industry in the state, and push us to the equal of Idaho, the only other state in the union that prohibits these Delta 8 and Delta 9 hemp-based intoxicants. And it's all about, and what's shocking to me is it comes from a party that claims to be all about individual liberty. And the way Dan Patrick justified pushing this bill, and he used some chicanery and, you know, held up some salary increases for government employees, teachers and stuff, and said, oh, we've got to do this before, was the truth. He's saying this is about protecting kids, right? This is about preventing kids from being able to buy all these scary weed products. And our governor, who waited till the last minute on Sunday night to veto it, he actually issued a statement saying he wants to see a regulatory commission, something like the Texas Alcohol and Beverage Commission, TABC, that would ensure that they are properly IDing people, that things are properly labeled, that they're basically treating it like alcohol and tobacco, which of course are both far, far more harmful to children and Texans and Americans holistically, cause far more health problems than people that are consuming Delta 8, Delta 9, or THC gummies, people that are using weed products. I think it was a victory for liberty, a victory that I didn't expect. And I'll tell you, Dan Patrick, I think, is being bought and paid for by the alcohol lobby and by the pharmaceutical, marijuana, and other big farm lobbies that don't want us as Americans to be able to choose what we ingest and tell us this nanny state nonsense that the Republican Party pretends it's not all about.
You know, when we first heard about this story, Charles, about would the governor sign this bill into law, banning THC products in Texas, we were thinking because he's a Republican, very conservative governor, he was going to do it.
Right.
He shocked everybody, including his own party, with what he finally did do, which was not what they thought he was going to do. But here's the hypocrisy of Mr. Patrick. Come on, Lieutenant Governor, man. You're really pissing on the American people and the people of Texas' leg and telling them it's rain. How could he be so upset about THC products in Texas? But as you said earlier, you super cool with tobacco products. Tobacco products kill more Americans in 1 year than what marijuana and THC do in 50 years.
Right.
But why there's no problem with that, Mr. Patrick? Because the tobacco lobby donates big money to politicians. The alcohol lobby, that's why we had prohibition, because at one point we knew how bad alcohol really was and the damage it would do to American families. But yet, where's the war on the campaign, Mr. Patrick, who try to hide behind Christian conservatism? Where's your campaign against strong malt liquor products that destroys way more in a week than what marijuana will do in 10 years? This is a con game to me, Charles, and it's playing on the intelligence of the American people and the voters of Texas, thinking that we're so gullible we'll believe anything that they tell us and we cannot think for ourselves. If you're going to ban THC, well, you need to ban tobacco products first. If you're going to ban THC, start with alcohol first. Then we'll work our way to the lesser, most dangerous one, marijuana. And really, there's medical proof that marijuana has some serious health benefits. But there is no medical proof that tobacco products have any. You have people who are cancer patients. The only reason they're still alive right now, because they can take marijuana to just hold on and endure the pain and ease the pain. There are people who have problems with seizures, epilepsy. When they smoke marijuana, they stop having seizures.
And it actually increases the appetite. But here's the other thing. 25 years ago at Harvard, I did a paper on drug enforcement and how it impacts people of color and poor Americans, and how it has shifted policing away from keeping people safe to oppressing people for drug use. And Patrick just wanted more oppression and more money from the alcohol lobby. Thank God it was vetoed.
That's it for the Face Off on Fox Soul. We'll catch you next time.